Good evening and welcome to the Dali Museum. I'd like to have you join me in welcoming our guest speaker, Ora Tanner, who is going to be talking about unforgettable learning, technology, and education. Ora is the co-founder and chief learning officer at the AI Education Project, a national nonprofit centering on equity and accessibility in AI education. They develop curriculum to teach high school students about artificial intelligence, its impacts, and the future of work, especially those from communities disproportionately impacted by AI and automation. Ora previously worked as a nuclear physicist, as an award-winning middle school science teacher, and most recently as a doctoral researcher at the University of South Florida, where she designed and studied digital games for learning and assessment in science education. She has earned both a BS and an MS in physics and is working to complete a PhD in instructional technology. She's presented at academic conferences, summits, demo days, professional development trainings, and has spoken as an EdTech expert on educational panels. Her work in education, technology, and design has been recognized in Forbes, EdSurge, Tampa Bay Inno, CMS Wire, CBS, CNBC, and she was recently listed as one of the 32 nonprofit leaders who will impact the world in 2021. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Ora Tanner.
Thank you so much. I am really excited to be here. Before we get started, I would like to thank the Dali Museum, especially Dr. Kim McQuarrie, for hosting me here tonight. And I hope everyone enjoys themselves and is ready to learn a lot. So as Kim stated, this is about unforgettable learning and basically how emerging technologies are being used to create immersive experience for education. So I am a huge lover of quotes, so we will start with one. That's one of my favorites. It says, "We need technology in every classroom and in every student and teacher's hand, because it is the pen and paper of our time, and it is the lens through which we experience much of our world." And that's by David Warlick. I'd like to add a caveat to that, however, that when we use technology, one, it needs to be meaningful uses of technology. We should never just be using technology for technology's sake or have students or learners just making things with technology just because. Secondly, when we use technology, especially for learning, it should do no harm. And so to kind of prevent that, we need to ensure that student voices, teacher voices, and the communities who will be impacted by this technology, they have a say-so at every point of the design process, from design, development, through deployment. And then finally, when we use technology, it should make us better humans, I like to say. So what we're doing should augment what we're doing and all of the good things that we're doing. So just an overview of what we'll be covering during our time together is one, just what is immersive learning? Why should we do it? And then I just want to go over three that I've kind of worked in. That's in artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and digital games. So we'll just kind of define what those are and give some examples. And then we'll get into some use cases, specifically some things that I've worked on, and then just some other things that I'm tangentially connected to. And then we'll have Q&A, so make sure if you're watching online to put your questions into the chat. So before we get started, I just want to share a little bit about me because it will inform some of the things I say later on in this presentation. I am a product of historically Black college and universities, HBCU, so Fisk University in Nashville and Dillard University of New Orleans, where I obtained a bachelor's, got my master's at University of South Florida and currently doing my PhD there. As far as my educational background, while I Did not go to four-year college. I do have a lot of experience. I was an educator at the Museum of Science and Industry in Tampa, Florida, as an informal educator. And I've also taught in Hillsborough County Public Schools as a science educator, and also as an instructor of astronomy at Pasco Hernando State College. And then just some other experiences that have really informed what I do as far as designing learning experiences is I've worked in big data analytics at the Educational Testing Service, which is out of Princeton, the Aspen Tech Policy Hub in San Francisco, and then more recently, the Alliance of Democracies, where I was able to create some really cool experiences, which I'll share about, and they're based out of Copenhagen. So let's get started. First off, immersive learning. What exactly is that? Basically, it's learning that leverages technologies such as augmented reality, virtual reality, and these sound like a lot of buzzwords, which we'll describe later on, but game-based learning, AI, and virtual 3D worlds, just to name a few. But what these technologies allow us to do is to simulate real-world scenarios. And students can learn through experience in a really safe environment, and they can make mistakes, but there's really no real-world consequences. So it's as close to real life as you can get without it actually being real. And so those are when you have really powerful experiences that stay with students for years after they've had those experiences. So what we have here is when we represent information, there is a spectrum of how this information is presented in the real world. And it goes all the way from concrete, where we have whatever the thing is itself. Say we're learning, a student is learning about frogs. The most concrete thing is to have an actual frog and let the student interact with it. And we go all the way over to the other end, where we get into abstract representations of whatever that thing is. So in this instance, we would have a student reading about that frog. So you go all the way from the iconic over to the symbolic. And so I want to kind of ask some questions. You can type this in the chat if you want. But where do you think most of our schooling, most of the types of information and experiences students have in the classroom? What part of the spectrum do you think that would be at? You would be correct. So because of our standardized education, because our assessments are tested, especially reading and math, students spend a lot of their learning experiences reading text, looking at formulas, graphs, tables, things like that. And that actually takes a lot of cognitive load to actually go through alphanumeric representations of something. There's a lot of encoding and decoding for the mind to make sense of that and then understand what that is. So outside of the classroom, where do you think the students are spending the types of learning experiences they're having? What's that you say? Yes. Videos and photos, that's literally social media. So they're sharing pictures of themselves and selfies, and they're on TikTok making videos. So you can see that's kind of far from where they're at in school, the types of representations in school. What the emerging technologies like AI, augmented reality, game-based learning, they're completely on the other end. So something like virtual reality is pretty close to real, but a lot of times it's not quite there. Something like AI is getting really close to duplicating things that seem real. The brain can't determine what's real and what's not. And there's a lot of images and video being created right now. And then we have things that are kind of beyond real. Augmented reality actually layers on top of our reality to make it more enhanced and give it a boost. And so the ultimate thing would not be to just be at one end or the other, but the more types of representations that we have of information, the better that a student will actually grab a hold of whatever the topic is that you're talking about. So we actually want to be showing the students models, videos, photos, having them do drawings, and not just the text, the graphs, and the tables. Some of the benefits of immersive learning are, of course, the research is just abundant. It increases engagement and motivation. And of course, we want our students to be engaged and motivated, excited about learning. It makes information memorable. Those synapses in the brain, when you have just these really rich learning experiences, they tend to go into long-term memory and not just stay when short-term like kids do when they study for a test and then they forget about it as soon as the test is over. It brings history to life. So when students are learning about things, instead of them seeing detached, like it's not relevant to them, it can really make it a connection between what they're learning. And then it also, immersive learning allows students to control their learning experience. So if, say, they're playing a game, they might have failed at a level, but they can go back and try it again. Or if they're watching a video, they might not have got it the first time, but they can go back and they can watch the video as many times as they want. And most importantly, it supports skills-based learning, not just knowledge-based learning. And I just want to point out this picture that you're seeing here on this slide is from a simulated environment out of University of Central Florida. It's called Teach Live, and they've actually created simulated students and classrooms for pre-service teachers to practice the types of scenarios and the student behavior that they will face when they actually go into the classroom. And I had an opportunity to try this, not at UCF, but Educational Testing Service. They had this similar thing. So at first it was kind of creepy because the students are kind of responding and they're doing things. And first you're like, hey, I'm talking to these virtual students. But after a while, you actually kind of forget that they are not real. And that's how immersive the experience is with the technology. So now we're about to go into just some definitions of what some of these things I've mentioned: artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and digital-based games. So I'm just gonna ask you a question. You can put it in the chat, but we're gonna talk about artificial intelligence first. So what is the first word that comes to your mind when you hear the phrase artificial intelligence? And normally when I ask this question, people say robots. People think of robots, they think of Terminator. Other words that come to mind are scary or dangerous, things like that. And that's because a lot of our impressions or conceptions of artificial intelligence come from science fiction books, as well as Hollywood. But that's far from what AI actually is. And then the second question I just wanted to ask is, respond to this statement: yes, no, or you're not sure. I have interacted with an AI application sometime in the last 24 hours. Okay, I'm hearing some yeses, maybe some I don't knows. The reason why I asked that question is because there was a Bloomberg Capital survey done in 2019 where 26% of adults were not aware that they were interacting with AI in their daily lives. So I'm gonna kind of go over some things. if you've ever done any of the following. Search for something on Google. Okay. Okay, then you definitely have interacted with artificial intelligence. Use Google Maps to find your way. I had to use it. I normally have all of my permissions off, so Google doesn't know where I'm at and track me. But that definitely is you're interacting with artificial intelligence. If you've ever used Instagram filters, I don't know, depending on your age group, you might still be on Facebook or Snapchat or something else. But if you've ever used any type of the filters, that is artificial intelligence. And if you've ever watched a YouTube video where it says, hey, watch this next, then you definitely have interacted with artificial intelligence. So just for the purposes of this presentation, we will define artificial intelligence as computer systems that perform tasks or make decisions that usually require human intelligence. And how it does that is all AI is, it's code that can learn. So if you take the picture of the killer robot out of your mind and then just think of lines of code, it's just basically code that can learn. So it takes huge troves of data and it finds patterns and trends that we as humans wouldn't even know that are there. And then it learns from that and uses that to make a decision or a prediction or to perform a task. So when you do email, artificial intelligence actually determines which emails should go to the spam folder, which ones should go to the marketing folder. If you are watching Netflix and binge watching, artificial intelligence is definitely using all of your previous watching preferences to predict what it thinks you will like to see next. And a lot of times it also is using data from other platforms that you will may be on as well. And I just want to point out something about this that's really interesting. If you have Netflix, the next time you're watching, if you have several family members, if each one of you logs into your account and pulls up the same movie, you will see that a different thumbnail is used for the various movies. Like when I teach students, we do like Stranger Things, and there's like 20 different thumbnails. So if you know your child or your husband or wife is really into romantic comedies, it'll make a movie look like that. If they're really into adventure, it'll make the thumbnail look like that. If they like, you know, things where people are getting blown up and killed, I don't know. So it's a cool experiment to do, but this is artificial intelligence being used to get you to watch more movies. And then finally, if you're on things like Snapchat, Facebook, YouTube, Pinterest, it is collecting data from everything you like, comments you make, and that information is actually then sold to third-party companies, and they use it for targeted ads and nudge you to buy things that you otherwise might not want. But that's artificial intelligence, code that can learn. So next up, we are looking at augmented reality. Augmented reality is very cool because it basically superimposes a layer on top of what we see in the real world, whether it's graphics, sounds, sometimes there's touch feedback, so sometimes it will be like a haptic type of interaction, and it basically creates an enhanced experience for our lives. So some examples of that, really popularly, those of you who did Pokemon Go. So you could go around the city or wherever you were at, and you would see these through your phone or your tablet, wherever you downloaded the app, these virtual creatures in all kinds of places, sitting on your table, on top of your watch, in the middle of traffic. Also, there are a lot of apps where you can look at just a mall or a strip of different places, and it will show you all of the restaurants that are there. Some of the stores actually have them where you hold up your device and it can show you which ones are on sale or which ones it thinks you will like. If you've ever been to China visiting, theirs is on a whole nother level because their AI is much more advanced because they have billions of people. So they have really refined it. But you can walk into a restaurant, and by the time you get there, you're getting notices on your phone for coupons of things it knows that you might want to eat. And those of you who are into do-it-yourself in your home, which I'm sure is all of us since the pandemic, you can use it to see what a piece of furniture would look like in your home without actually having to bring it in. I know I used the app at, I believe it was Lowe's, to see what different colors would look like for your living room. So that is augmented reality. Augmented reality kind of puts a layer on top of what's already there. And then I just want to take a slight moment to go over to virtual reality. Virtual reality is just this immersive computer simulated reality. You think you're there. You can interact through headsets you normally see in advertisements and things like that. But you also can get sounds, images, other sensations that replicate what real life looks like, or you can just create a totally different imaginary world. And you don't always have to have the headsets on. This photo here in the top left is showing during the pandemic, tons of conferences were canceled, as I'm sure you know. However, there were some conferences that were held inside of a virtual reality environment. So what you could do is you could go in, you could create an avatar, and then you could actually go inside of that environment. I know I was in one where, if you turn your head of the avatar inside of it, it was really interesting and cool, but it allows you to interact with other people as well inside of that world. However, most virtual reality uses some type of headset. If you've been to Universal or Disney, they have different experiences where you actually feel like you are on, a roller coaster. I've seen some experiences where you're in a wind tunnel and you feel like you're actually skydiving. I've seen underwater experiences where you have them on and, hey, I really am swimming, like with the fishes. Although that's in a bad way, but okay, don't want to swim with the fishes. And then the military has been implementing virtual reality really most technologies and a lot of their trainings like flight simulators and things like that. So virtual reality is really simulating and it's very immersive. And another one I want to talk about, which I have a lot of experience with, and it's actually what my doctorate is on, is game-based learning. And I want to start off by saying game-based learning and gamification are two totally different things. So game-based learning, well, I'll start with gamification. Gamification is just using components of games to get students to want to learn. So things like points or stars or leveling up or leaderboards. So these are things you would normally find in games. And the metaphor they normally use is it's like putting chocolate on top of broccoli. So supposedly, I guess, learning in and of itself is not exciting and fun enough. So you have to gamify it by adding these different things and encouraging students to learn. Game-based learning, on the other hand, uses the entire game for instruction. So the entire learning takes place by the student being inside of the game and going through the game. So there is a storyline, there's a narrative. A lot of times the students will take on a role. There's a goal that you have to achieve, and that's normally an academic goal. There's challenges, rules, you're interacting, which is the practice of it, and you're getting feedback on how you're doing. Some examples of that, some of you might be familiar with the Oregon Trail that was out a long time ago. I never played it, but it's basically your family, and you're traveling across the West, and you're facing all of these hardships and things like that. But you actually get to learn what it was like for the early settlers. Um, the one on the bottom is from Citizen Science. This one is really cool because you're collecting samples and you're doing science tests and you're using your problem solving skills to make decisions, and based on your decisions determines how the game plays out for you. But you are practicing basically being a scientist within the game. And the one up in the right is called Branches of Power, and this is by I forget the name of the company who made it, just slipped my mind. But basically this one, you are running all three branches of government. So you're making a presidential agenda. And then you go to Congress and you see what it's like to pass legislation. And then you're reviewing things in the judicial branch. But the students are actually taking on those roles. They're doing the task that you would do if you were in that role. And this is all in a game-based learning environment. So now you kind of have an idea of what artificial intelligence is, what augmented reality is, and what game-based learning is. Now I want to actually go into some use cases for each one of these and kind of share just some things I've worked on and highlight some things some other people have done as well. So first, we'll look at augmented reality in education. So I was previously the assistant director at the Office of Undergraduate Research at University of South Florida. And it kind of boggled my mind. Like every year we had this huge conference. And so you have students who have helped professors do all of this amazing, mind-blowing research. However, when it came to disseminating about this research, it was always through a poster. So think about that spectrum again. So you go from doing all of these great things on the concrete side, with videos, you're doing things. But then when it comes to telling people and sharing with them and wanting them to get excited about your work, then you go to text, tables, equations, graphs. So I was actually able to pilot using augmented reality it still was a poster, but I was like, at least we can try and layer something on top of it. So what you see on the left here is the students, they're holding up their devices. They were able to kind of download an app on their phone. And then instead of just looking at static pictures, they were able to actually see things come to life. So, models of molecules, or this particular one was about evacuation during hurricanes in certain areas. So they were actually able to see real time what were the evacuation routes that people took during the previous hurricane. And then this is really interesting because instead of this picture in the top where it's talking about, I think it's called checkered beetles or something, now you're able to get some footage from the field of what that looked like. And now you're able to have conversations around dynamic content instead of just looking at a 2D picture. The same thing with the person's face. You're able to now, instead of just reading all the text on the poster, hey, let's actually look at how these blood cells are interacting with contagions. So it was a big hit. We piloted it with one of the classes from the College of Public Health, and students really engaged with that research more on the posters who use this approach. And so I hope it continues, that we will go this way, especially when it comes to dissemination in science. And so continuing with another example of augmented reality, some colleagues of mine, they're from Movers and Shakers NYC, who I had an opportunity to work with in an incubator that I was in. They have created an augmented reality app to to kind of highlight the scarcity of monuments to historical figures of color. So, of course, there's all these monuments of just various people, but there's very few of women, very few of people of color. So their thinking and rationale is, instead of trying to bring down those monuments, which is very costly, we'll put up new monuments through augmented reality. So they have worked with artists and developers and programmers to come up with this app. And so this is some of the people, like you have Serena Williams is all the way to the right, Jackie Robinson, Colin Kaepernick. So you have all these different people that they've created, and you can actually, through their app, which is on the next slide, you can actually set these up. So I think I have 3 of them set up right now in my living room, but it's really, really cool. And then while you're in the app, you can actually now read about them and learn their story, learn the history, what was it that they did. And it's really interesting because I was playing with it the other day, so you can really go in close and kind of walk around them. You can turn them, you can make them super big, kind of like the one you saw before. So it's really cool way for students, once again, to get immersed and get a different experience than just reading about these famous people just in a paragraph. So it's really, really cool. So now we're going to talk a little bit about game-based learning use cases. So these are just some screenshots of a couple of games. I made some more, but these were my most recent ones. So a part of my work as a doctoral student was to create games, not just for learning, but also for assessment. So some of them are Surf's Up Science, where it taught students about the impact of global waves on ocean waves on local temperature. So I kind of had this whole scene with this guy who's a surf person, and it uses real data from surfing spots all around the world. And it's this whole storyline. So the students really enjoyed that. Another one is called Chicken Collision. And this is actually an idea. Well, the game teaches students about balance and unbalanced forces. But I actually had read a story about how the Air Force uses chickens to test their planes because there's so many, what are they called? Bird impacts every year that down planes. Who knew? So I was like, that would be epic. So in this game, the students actually are shooting chickens out of an air cannon at planes and then taking measurements. And they really, really got into it. And they understand force and motion. So that's so that's the power of technology and immersive learning. So would you rather shoot chickens or just read about it in your textbook? I dare say people want to shoot chickens out of an air cannon. So those are just a couple of examples. Another game that I made just last summer in the middle of the pandemic is called the Disinformation Diaries. This was a project that I worked on to teach citizens about just the impact of disinformation and deep fakes on democratic elections. And so it was this whole storyline. The main character, her name was Truly Be Veritas. And she's fighting against Doomly Doomus, who's like, but it basically real time shows the people how people so easily fall into disinformation, and they learn from it because they're making mistakes, and it might seem like a logical thing to do to respond, hey, that's not me, but actually that makes things worse. So actually it was piloted in Copenhagen, and it did so well that now they have translated it into Georgian and now German, and it's being used to educate people in Europe about impact of disinformation on elections. So I was really excited about that, but it really puts you, by taking on the role of this political candidate and all the things that are coming against her, you soon realize and learn, just how things work when it comes to that. So, and just a little bit more about games, since that's my area. Games really create this environment that is active, it's situated, there's context there, and it's very experiential. And it just allows you to problem solve, think about things differently, do actual tasks that you would do in an actual role. You can actually get a lot of data from games. It's called process data. So on just normal test, where you would just, hey, this is the answer they got. In games, you can actually track their decision making, and you might have found out, hey, they were understanding all the way up until this last point. So the data is just very useful at really understanding what students know and can do. And then the motivation, the research has just shown that students persist more in digital game environments with really complex content than they do in the traditional classroom. So there's just a lot of research that supports the use of games for learning. And so now, this last piece, which is something I'm really working on now, I currently am the co-founder and chief learning officer at a nonprofit, and we're working on AI education and just really creating AI literacy for high school and middle school students, especially those in untapped communities. So this part, I just want to share how AI is currently being rolled out. Just a few examples. So I kind of mentioned this at the beginning, but this one in the top left, it's being used to help pre-service teachers prepare for teaching. And so that's an actual digital students, and they're doing what students would do. And the teachers, but in this instance, it's capturing all of the teacher data to help better their practice. This one on the bottom is they're using AI by facial recognition to kind of read the emotions of students while they're learning. So are they paying attention? Are they happy? Are they surprised? Are they engaged? By looking at the muscle movement. And there's a lot of those different types of things as well. Watching gaze is another way, how their eyes are going when they're online. And I know, especially over in China, it's used a lot to determine if they're, engaged. And it's kind of funny, but not funny. But if they're not, the system there, it pings their parents. So if you go down below a certain level, it will let people know, the parents know. Up in the right, these are what are called social robots. So AI is being used to kind of help students understand how to interact with one another. If the teacher is doing another task, it can kind of do that type of remedial work that the teacher normally would do. And these social robots have actually been found to be very effective with students who are autistic. They have found that the students feel more comfortable interacting and talking with social robots than they do with human beings. So they're able to learn those social cues and those skills because AI is tracking all of their data, knows how to respond to them, and helps them kind of adapt better. And this was one of the cuter ones that I looked, but some of them, like on this next slide, look kind of creepy. But Japan, I think it's been a few years now, launched the world's first robotic teacher. Vietnam earlier this year launched a whole army of robot teacher assistants that will be deployed across their classrooms. So right now, I believe this one, I don't know how much further they've gotten, but the last I checked, that robot teacher could take roll and say, be quiet, sit down, don't do that. So a long way to go to continue to learn. This one on the bottom is really exciting. They're using AI now to bring pictures of historical figures to life and animate them. So because it has pictures of other people's faces and the person's face, it can kind of predict, what the face would look like in the different positions. So that's what you see here. So there's one of Frederick Douglass. That's really cool. Amelia Earhart, Darwin, Marie Curie. Of course, you see Harriet Tubman here. So I just think this is a game changer for history, social studies, really helping students connect. And I also just saw an article come out where they just have a slew of people like Benjamin Franklin using AI, what those people would look like in real life. So that's very interesting as well. And this one in the top is really cool. It's through Microsoft. It's called Seeing AI. It helps people who are impaired visually. You can actually just point it at a scene, and the AI, because of how much data it has taken in, is able to tell the person, oh, it's a young girl throwing a Frisbee in the park, because it recognizes all those different things from the troves of data it has. Or, oh, that's a person on a skateboard, or a person, on their computer. So it has been so helpful for people who are visually impaired and blind. It also reads text, so you can just point it at text, and it will tell you what it says, and it can even tell you what it says in different languages, and it can read product labels and just a bunch of other things. So in addition to all of these that I've shown you, AI is also being used for a lot of things like just the automated tasks like grading and attendance. It's used for a lot of tutoring as well. So AI is also being used in higher education. However, there are problems, of course. So there's algorithms that are used to predict what a student's score would be. This happened last year because of COVID and the canceling of tests. They gave all the data about students, and then AI was used to predict what their test score would have been on the IB exam. Of course, that was not good. Also, it's being used for a lot of monitoring and tracking on a lot of campuses where a student comes in late. Oh, hey, we haven't seen them at the library. It's supposed to be for safety, like, hey, we haven't seen them doing their normal rounds, so let's alert someone to go check on them. And it's also been found to charge Black and Hispanic students a higher interest rate for college loans, because AI is working off of that historical data. And if you went to a community college or a school that's not as elite, I guess it's thinking you're not as creditworthy. So while there are all these awesome things that AI can do in education, there still are bias issues and privacy issues, which leads me to my last few points. So I've shown you things that technology can do to make these incredible immersive learning experiences, but it always comes down to the design. So there are things that need to be considered when you are creating these things. Just like algorithms, there are discriminatory designs, and that can result when you don't center the students and their communities in what you're doing. And so you can't make assumptions, or actually your assumptions will come out in your design if you don't actually think about the implications, like who would be impacted, how could this go for different groups? Normally when people design learning or technologies in general, they only have one type of student in mind. So that's why you have to get those different voices, and voices from the community and voices from teachers involved. And definitely that's why culturally sensitive design, understanding everyone doesn't come from just the same culture, and not just ethnic cultures either, even youth culture or anything like that. And so just a little bit about culturally relevant pedagogy. These are activities that are relevant to the learner's life. It sets high expectations for all students, making authentic assessments, so things they would actually do in the real world, and then making it outcome-based, having them actually show and prove, demonstrate what they have learned, and then just considering situational factors, such as I was creating learning experiences during COVID, so I had to realize students are at home. They may have lost a loved one. Someone might have lost a job. They may have one device with, 5 or 6 people sharing it. So I knew what I designed had to be able to be done within 15 to 30 minutes. I also wanted to be able to give students hope. So while they're on here doing our curriculum, I want to inspire them to think about their future beyond where they're at right now with the pandemic. And then just recognizing just students with limitations and disabilities, and always going to evidence-based models as well. So all of these things need to be concerned, not just start making cool things. You have to think about the people and center them and their experience and their communities, and then even take into consideration your own background and biases that you might have. So I want to end with another slight quote by Jamie Donnelly, who's really big in the AR/VR space for education. And she basically says, imagine a future where information will move from text to experiences. And I hope that happens, but I also hope we do it properly and with deliberation and with careful thought, with all students in mind. So hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about how technology is being used to create immersive learning experiences. And I hope that it inspires you to go out and try some of these tools and make something yourself.
What do you see as the biggest barrier to being able to do this on a large scale?
Of course, the big one is cost. So creating these learning experiences with these technologies cost a lot, and it's dependent on devices as well. So even if you were able to create them, if there are not devices to do them on or the hardware, the students won't be able to experience it. And also, there's just not a lot of people trained to do this well. So I think that's another big barrier. And then just the teacher professional development on how to implement this effectively is the third big barrier.
And there is another question. So there's another question on what you think, if you have an opinion on NFTs and the metaverse.
The question is, what are my opinions on NFTs and the metaverse? Okay, I honestly don't I have not really looked into those that at all, so I don't have any. That's not a part of my area that I really, yes.
Ora, this has been fantastic. Wanted to ask you the question about that last quote about the aspiration that text will be replaced by experiences. And of course, every writer of text wants to be eloquent enough to create a kind of mental experience. But with the visualization, with movement, with maybe even 3 dimensions, the emotional experience can overwhelm the concept. And do you see a danger in the kind of corruption of abstract thought by emotion-laden, compelling imagery?
Okay, thank you. The question is, do I see there being a danger of text being corroded by overladen visual and emotionally charged experiences like we've seen. No, I just think like the research actually tells us that like teachers kind of move back and forth between these different representations. However, they don't do a good job of teaching students, like connecting all of them together for students. So, and even students themselves are, immersed daily. They're watching videos and doing all of these things. They're on games with headsets. But they also have not been taught just how to move back and forth between the different representations. So I think if we do a better job of teaching students, because you need all of them, like, hey, this text will help you express, what happened here, in this emotional thing, because you felt that, you experienced that, but here are some different ways you can kind of interpret this or process that. And text and writing are actually really powerful processing tools when you do have an experience. So I think if we just do a better job of teaching the students how to connect all these representations together as a collective whole, then we won't see this lopsided type of outcomes that we do right now.